Field Zoo and the Field Museum of Chicago. And then there are people like me who love to listen to Bill every week as announcer and scorekeeper for NPR's gut-busting comedy quiz show, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. Anyone else listening to that? You gotta listen to it, it's fantastic. Bill took over the position after newsman Carl Castle retired in 2014 and who sadly passed away yesterday. He was a wonderful guy. Really wonderful guy. But Bill is a worthy successor whose wit and striking impersonations of people in the news fills listeners with glee. I'd like to call Bill to the podium in the style of the Listener Limerick Challenge, a segment on Wait Wait in which Bill reads a verse to be completed by the caller. Audience, help me out and finish the rhyme. He's reported of scandals and murders, and others who set out to hurt us. But even they don't begrudge him when he's hailed a legend, for he's the one and only Bill Curtis. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bill Curtis.
There was a time before cable, when only men read the news. In San Diego, that man was Ron Burgundy. He had a voice that could make a wolverine purr. He wore suits better than Sinatra. Oh, I could go on, but why? That was a lot of fun, Ron. Congratulations, what a great introduction. I had no idea when I was asked to speak today that it would send me on a journey through my own life. And I was surprised at how many important intersections there are with volunteers. So I adopted your theme as my theme. Volunteers who plant seeds that would later grow into examples of how we would all like to grow up to be. In the latter part of my career, after 30 years with CBS, I produced documentaries, mainly on A&E and primarily murder stories, which one day might come in handy, especially having just gotten married. But my most memorable period was a series called The New Explorers, described by Newsweek magazine as Nova with an adrenaline rush. It was a science adventure on PBS, and I want to talk about two of the shows because they involved people who devoted their lives to the community in which they lived, and a third person who triggered the biggest story of my career. Randy Borman was the son of missionaries serving in Ecuador. His father was translating the Bible into the language of the Kofan Indians, who lived at the edge of the Amazon ecosystem alongside a river. Randy lived with his parents in the Indian camp in thatched roof huts. Must have been idyllic in the rainforest. They swam in the river where pink dolphins would rise and dive. They hunted for a living. Food literally grew on trees. Some kept toucans in their huts, the colorful tropical bird. Children didn't work, they played. Randy was homeschooled by his mother until he was college age. And then, as parents often do, they said, paradise is over. You have to go to real school, Randy, in a far-off place called Illinois. Can you imagine the shock? Just the weather to come from the Ecuador area to Chicago. But he looked up the name Illinois and decided it was Indian, so it must be good. He did his best to adapt, though he kept hunting in the forest preserves. What was available there, squirrels, raccoons, fresh meat. He lasted here long enough to get an education before he said, enough. His parents didn't realize, I guess, that while they were working as missionaries, Randy was living and playing with the Indians. My home, he said, is with my family, the Kofan Indians. So he went back. He spoke the Kofan language, he knew the culture, so he got married. He built his own thatch roof house He began to raise a family, 3 children to be exact. He swam in the river, the children did, hunted in the rainforest. They had classes in open air thatch roof huts on stilts. Eventually, Randy Borman was named chief of the Gofan tribe. I went there to do a documentary, and after meeting him and seeing the tribe, I called it American Chief in the Amazon. From Chicago, it looked idyllic, but sooner or later you learn that every community has problems. And in the Amazon, those problems are a little different than ours. One day, women were washing clothes in the river and noticed a black streak that was coming down with the current. It was oil. Exploratory wells had found a rich deposit of oil, and it was fouling the very heart of Gofan territory, where they got their food, their drinking water, their lifeblood. The tribe ran to tell Randy, and he immediately knew something had to be done. His education at Wheaton College gave him an advantage. He took the tribe first on a political venture to Quito, the capital of Ecuador, and demanded to see the president and expressed the tribe's displeasure. They staged demonstrations in the streets, but his most brilliant tool came when he got word that an oil rig had gone up in Gofan territory without permission, and oil had already spilled into the pristine rainforest. Randy had an idea. There were enough young men to make an impression. So they marched at night through the rainforest. When they got to the edge of a clearing and peered across it, they could see piles of pipe laying on the ground. Big engines were whirring as cables pulled the pipes up with their drill bits. Men with oil glistening off their bodies pulled and tightened to send the drill deep into virgin ground. Randy's men were silent, careful. They stripped down to native dress and began to paint on their bodies and faces war paint, carrying spears, machetes, and knives with toucan feathers and headdresses. They jogged across the clearing and up the ladders to the platform where the crews were working. One modern touch. Randy was smart enough to videotape it all with his small home camera. The warriors never said a word, but silently moved around the crew and just stared at them, not smiling, spears in hand, faces marked with paint, and they were frightening. In 15 minutes, the drilling platform was empty. The oil company would never return to the Gofan territory. The drillers were scared to death. Randy Borman had followed his heart and then his head, an educated head. Anyone knows that volunteer work never really ends. For Randy Borman and the Gofans, their little victory was just the beginning. Today, the Gofan Indians, who have a website on Google, patrol 195 square miles, that's 1 million acres of rainforest, as official guardians appointed by the Ecuadorian government. You never know what the payoff is going to be, but he was pretty successful. Dr. Laurie Marker worked at Lincoln Park Zoo for a while. Her particular field of study and career involved cheetahs. She would train them, feed them, work in a special program to mate them at various zoos, and she gradually moved into the DNA profiling, collecting blood samples and tracing cheetahs back to their early evolution. Along with other scientists, she made a disturbing discovery. All the cheetahs in the world, primarily Africa, come from only one family, but don't we all? They spread north from what is now Namibia, just north of South Africa, in only 10 families. Those families multiplied and prospered, but with a shadow that was following them. They lacked diversity. With only 10 families as their original bloodline, it meant that the DNA would eventually weaken and cheetahs would eventually die out from inbreeding. They had a second problem. They were being killed. It wasn't poaching. cheetah skins don't bring as much as elephant tusks, and rhino horns and leopard heads. In Namibia, where most of the cheetahs remain, farmers regarded them as pests, like coyotes that kill cattle in my part of the country in Kansas. So farmers were killing them, trapping cheetahs like raccoons, and proudly bragging about it. That's just where Laurie wanted to go. Namibia looks like Arizona, desert-like for the most part, but there is beauty around, a desert here, a desert there. Skeleton Coast, huge sand dunes that go right down to the ocean, where a herd of elephants have developed special feet to traverse the sand. The native Bushmen live there. It's often called the land God made in anger, which reminded me of last weekend here in Chicago. Laurie was faced with a dilemma. She could live a good life, working at the zoo, but if she was going to have anything left to study, shouldn't she be doing something to save the cheetahs? She would have to become a science evangelist to tell the world of their plight. But most important, she would have to convince the old German farmers to stop killing them. It seemed daunting and frankly impossible. She'd be starting from scratch. She would be learning on the job. She would be far from home. But she had something that you nominees have. A feeling in your belly that if you don't do it, who will? And if you don't do it, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. You won't get rich volunteering, but you'll make the sacrifice because it's the right thing to do. Now, a farm in Namibia is not quite the same as Illinois. It's usually 5,000 hectares, which is about 10,000 acres. It also doesn't have our rich topsoil. You need 10,000 just to find enough grass to feed 100 head of cattle. Dr. Laurie Marker was young and pretty, with an advantage over the owners of the big farms, old Germans, just like Schomburg, I think. And she began her crusade by visiting every farmer she could find, especially those who had a reputation for killing cheetahs. I accompanied her on one visit, and I won't forget it. Investigative reporting, this was easy. We pulled up to a ranch house. A tall man came to the door, not particularly friendly. He was expecting Laurie. He went inside and he came out with a record book. He opened it proudly. I motioned my cameraman to shoot over her shoulder as we both looked down at the book. Cheetah shot, March 1989. Harassing sheep. Cheetah shot 2 weeks earlier. Went down the list through 137 cheetahs, as though they were rats. Laurie didn't lose it, but I felt sick. She asked, why? Why do you have to shoot? He said, they're cowards. They are fast, yes, but they won't fight because they're small and destructive to us farmers. Their defense system is speed, and they're the fastest in the world. That was a sample of what Laurie would face for the next 28 years. I left with wonderful footage and a good story, but with a heavy heart, thinking, good luck. I'll see you in 6 months when you have to give it up. That was 28 years ago. Shortly after I left, Laurie started the Cheetah Conservation Fund, the first and longest running organization dedicated to saving the cheetah in the world. During a fundraising trip here, I asked her, how did you get those rough old farmers to stop shooting cheetahs? She said, we had coffees, meetings, anything to get them to listen to me. I told them that they have the biggest number, the fastest and most beautiful animal in the world. They are the last of their kind, and you have the power to save them. We introduced donkeys and big dogs to protect the sheep and cattle and help them out. We paid for better fences, but it was education and young people who turned the tide. Pretty strong stuff. In the meantime, she has been responsible for 400,000 square miles to be set aside as a conservancy. It's where she and the fund do their DNA work. And she makes yearly trips to America to raise money for her work in keep your eye out for the Cheetah Conservation Fund. She's won many awards by now. I've introduced her by saying she is the new Jane Goodall, and shows what one person can do if you're willing to give yourself to serve others. I'll close with a young woman who was responsible for the biggest story of my career. It may be one of the biggest civilian contributions to veterans ever. She was working as a veterans representative at the regional office of the Veterans Administration on Dearborn Street in Chicago. She was hearing a similar story from veterans during the war. They were coming back. She made a list of 12 of them. They had skin lesions, mental problems, and more that couldn't be diagnosed by doctors. Maud DeVictor realized that even though she couldn't put her finger on it, something was very wrong. So she brought the names to me. As I dug in with a unit of investigative reporters and producers, a story began to emerge. In Vietnam, we were fighting a difficult war in a jungle. We had trouble even seeing the enemy through the foliage. So the military began spraying the trees and the plants with an herbicide that would take the leaves off the trees. When it began, the only research into Agent Orange was that it was harmless to humans. Farmers had used it for years with no apparent problems. So we had to show that in Vietnam, Agent Orange was different than when I used it with my dad in Kansas. It turns out the herbicide was so effective, the military wanted more and more, especially around the fire bases. And they would clear for 500 yards so they could see the enemy coming. But the process of making it required more heat, which created a poisonous substance called dioxin, one of the most deadly that man makes. When we used the new Agent Orange, it caused injury, both to the Vietnamese and to us, and even cancer in whoever is exposed to it. That story, we broke it in 1978. Today, 200,000 veterans have been compensated. 50 diseases, including cancer, soft tissue, lymphomas primarily, have been associated with Agent Orange. We proved it. But Maud DeVictor was the volunteer who recognized that something was wrong, and she sought out the right people outside the system and her office, people to solve it. Journalists don't carry the power themselves, but we communicate problems to intelligent people with the power to solve them. Maud DeVictor was a whistleblower, one of the first, meaning a person inside a company or organization who had information that otherwise would be hidden. Reporters could never get to it, but it was so important people could be hurt if something wasn't done. Volunteers come in many forms, but they all have one thing in common. They want to help others. It is the essence of a favorite word of mine, namaste. You may have heard, you may know what it means, but I was struck by the fact I didn't know what it meant and didn't know the language behind it. My soul honors your soul. It honors that place inside you where the entire universe resides. It honors your light, your life, your truth, your beauty, and your peace. Because I am the same. There is no distance between us, no difference. Namaste means we are united. We are one. That's why I say, namaste.